Good afternoon. Um, I essentially work with the small businesses, and small businesses put together is a very big business. When we are looking at the circular economy and the materials recycling, we are essentially looking at these kinds of enterprises. The first one that you see is dyeing. Second one, of course, is the plastic. The third one is leather and leather goods. And the fourth one is also around leather. Now, if we look at a two-digit classification of the sectors which are there in the MSMEs, there are 47 sectors in which MSME is engaged, or micro, small, medium enterprises are engaged. And we did a study with GIZ some 4 years ago, and we identified that 10 out of these 47 sectors are highly resource intensive. And these 10 stopped working. Okay. These 10 sectors in which, yeah, this one is not working. Okay. Okay, working again. So, out of these 47, the 10 that I am mentioning are foundry, sponge iron, leather tanning, textiles, dyes and chemicals, electroplating, brick kilns, ceramics, glass and glassware, pulp and paper. And some of these examples today, Professor Chari had also mentioned to us in the audience. But what I'll do is, I'll pick up just the first one, which is the foundry, and just get a little deeper into it, and then try and come up with some common points that Dr. Ashok Khosla mentioned about the basic questions that we are struggling with at the policy level. So all these 10 sectors are essentially primary resource based, with very significant share of the micro, small and medium enterprises. And some of these use primary material, but some of them also use secondary materials. And foundries, brick kilns, textiles and pulp and paper use a lot of secondary material also. The processes through which these manufacturing takes place has a very significant scope for efficiency improvement. If you are looking at technologies, then you can have a very small technology, you can also have a grand scale of technology in all these sectors. So you could have a small plant of, let's say, about 1 crore. You could also have a plant which is of 100 crores in all these sectors to take it forward. And what is very interesting here is that there is a lot of ways by which this improvement in efficiency can take place without having to do much of a capital investment. It is possible to do it by simple process changes, which essentially are very skill-based. So if the people who are working in the plant begin to understand as to how these processes need to be changed, it could also lead to a significant improvement. And they have all enormous quantities of solid waste which is coming out of them and which is leading to the landfill and the illegal dumpages. Again, many of these examples we saw in Professor Chari's example in his presentation today. So I'm just zeroing in into just one of them and then drawing the common lessons. Now, India has about 10 million metric tons of castings which are being produced from 5,500 foundries, and we are the second largest casting material manufacturers in the world after China. And out of this 10 million metric tons, 5 million metric tons is essentially made from small enterprises. And they are all using coke. The other 5,000 are using electricity or gas. And these 5 million tons, which means 50% of the total production in India, which is happening from 5,000 small enterprises, are using pig iron, which is a primary extracted material, and metal scrap, which is a secondary material, and also coke. So these are the three basic, let's say, raw materials which are used in this. And there are two outputs which are coming in the form of waste, which we call it waste, are burnt sand and slag. And the slag is approximately 10% of the casted material, which means the molten metal. So that means 500,000 tons of slag is coming out, and which is just going to the landfilling or put into the dumps. Now, this is how the process looks like for some of you who may not be very familiar with it. So on the first hand, you find a big furnace through which the molten metal is coming out and it is being poured into a bucket. This bucket is then taken to the second picture, if you see, and put it into molds. And from the molds, you get this kind of a material. So when you have this molten material, at the top you can get slag, but then the slag is actually taken out from the behind, and then it is collected separately and then thrown. Now, from 2007 to 2017, almost 10 years have passed now, and 650 enterprises have upgraded in improving their melting efficiency through various programs which have been supported by GIZ, Department of Science and Technology, European Union Switch Asia project for carbon dioxide reduction, and the efficiency improvement in energy savings is between 10 to 40%, which is enormous, and that essentially means that these small enterprises end up saving 5 lakh rupees per annum per enterprise, which means 32.5 crores per annum. And that is also the amount of saving of the coal and therefore the emissions in terms of carbon dioxide. Now, we also looked at the issue of this slag which is coming out, and TARA, which is the Development Alternatives and Development Alternatives, collaborated with us, and we together worked out a technology with them for the commercial utilization of this slag, which could then be used for making paver blocks. Now, this is how the system works. So if you have slag coming out from there, you can crush that into the second picture as you see. The crushing leads to block manufacturing, and then finally you have paver blocks, which are basically cement blocks, and you must have seen it on the sides of the roads. Now, the Department of Science and Technology has a scheme which says that if you can come up with innovative solutions, it is possible for them to fund the creation of such enterprises. Now, if you look at the bigger picture in India, all that you need is 250 such paver block manufacturers in the country who can consume the entire slag from India. 5 lakh tons of foundry waste. Now, this is nothing, no rocket science here. The technology is now well available. What is the issue in getting 250 enterprises in a big country like India, which would lead to savings here? Now, this project will essentially help that by 2020, we will have only 50 such enterprises created. And who takes the responsibility? So essentially, when we looked at it, we have to essentially look at two levels. One is the symptomatic level and the other is the causal reasons, which means the reason why these symptoms are coming up. And I think we realized that the biggest question was the awareness issue. Most of the enterprises, they are all paying money to the tractorwalas to remove this waste and get it dumped illegally somewhere. But they don't know that there is a possible use like this. So the first barrier is the awareness barrier. And awareness cannot be essentially created by government people because they don't have an outreach to reach millions of enterprises in the country. So essentially you require industry associations which can do this job. But the industry associations are weak, and they continue to tell us that, look, we do not have funds, we do not have money for doing these programs. So the first issue that I think the policy can tackle is the weak associations. The second important issue is the technology acceptance barrier. And when I am saying technology acceptance barrier, it is not the owner of the small enterprise which will say, yes, I like this idea and I want to do it and I am willing to put in the money. It is also the engagement of the labor within the factory who should be able to come forward and say, yes, I like the idea and I am also willing to work on it. So supervisors and labor also has to be engaged. And since a lot of labor in the small enterprise is essentially contractual, they really do not have an incentive to engage into these elements. So we have to have a system which can address this issue of incentivizing the labor. The third very critical issue is the bank linkages. Now, this is not an area that banks understands as a model, a business model, and therefore the bankers need to be educated. And the fourth one is that when essentially we are looking at how do you connect these barriers. And when I'm talking about this, I'm saying that the Pollution Control Board would only look at the end of the pipeline solution and not say that, look, there is a technology available and why don't you take that up? So what is the policy intent that we are coming to, the final one that I'm supposed to address in this particular session? I think what we require is a national level mapping of all the resources which are being used in the small enterprises. And we are talking about only 1,176 industrial clusters in the country, of which the 10 sectors that I was mentioning to you are only 200 clusters. So all that we require to do is to understand what is the waste which is being generated, what are the resource efficiency barriers which need to be tackled in only 200 locations in the country. Not a big deal. But unfortunately, the kind of data that we get at the MSME level is a very weirdly sort of aggregated data. But you do not get to know how much quantity of waste, what are the characteristics, what is being done with that particular waste, how much more can be done with it. So that, I think, is the first policy level issue that we need to tackle. The second is, where is this waste going and where it is being dumped? The third is potential of substitution. Now, good thing is that in all these 10 subsectors, there are already pilots which are running. The good part is that something is already happening somewhere, but it is not being replicated. So therefore, we need to have, business profiles and business models which can essentially be created so that the bankers are willing to fund it. The fourth is to create business opportunities so that the entrepreneurs which are willing to invest in it can come forward, and somebody needs to connect them. Now, fortunately, in this particular case where Development Alternatives has funded it and supported this in terms of the technology creation, the good part is that if you use waste, it makes the final product cheaper by 50 paisa per paver block. And the quality that you get is also better than when you use the natural sand. But this may not be the case with all the wastes. And therefore, in certain cases, we may have to fund the viability gap. So the ultimate goal, if we have to get into zero extractions and zero landfills, we essentially need to focus upon connecting the various dots. And I will not go into these recommendations because I just mentioned to you now. So we have to basically ensure that the various government institutions and departments which are essentially working in silos and not looking at the overall thing need to work themselves together to be able to ensure that the final solutions are grounded. The bankers need to also learn. The policy support is required for exposure building. We need a stronger enforcement of laws. And we can also ensure that if public procurement can be a major driver here to buy such kind of green products, that would also enable our enterprises to move on to, business solutions. And finally, we need to undertake integrated initiatives and not have small schemes of assistance. There are 450 schemes in India run by 40 different central ministries. 450 schemes. Now, one of them is providing design support, another one is providing technology, third one is providing lean manufacturing assistance. This doesn't work. We essentially need to see that if a sector requires a holistic approach, then many of these schemes need to be merged together to target the final answers. Thank you very much.